Might get underway. My name's Chris Decker. I'm the Senior Case Manager at Red Union, primarily assisting with industrial issues, including bullying. I've been working here for about 3 years. With us, we have Terry Collins, who's a consultant with us, but he has vast experience in investigations and including bullying matters in the workplace, including in the public sector. And then with us, we also have Margaret Gilbert, the president of the NPAQ, who you may all know. And we also have Vicky here as well, and you work at Queensland Health as well, is that?
No, I'm quite separate from Queensland Health, so I'm an administrator for an online bullying group, hope to become an action group called Nurses and Midwives Against Bullying Australia, and then I also have my own business, which I hope to work with unions and associations, complementary, providing advice to nurses and midwives and students on how to manage workplace conflict, particularly where there are aspects of bullying.
Fantastic. So we might get underway. I don't know if you potentially want to start, Mark?
Yeah, so I'll welcome the group this morning. A great turnout. Previous bullying panel that we had earlier this year, we had over 300 people join us, and today we're up over 50 at the present time. I'll mention that this is going to be recorded. As nurses, we're well aware with the shift work, there'll be 30% working, 30% sleeping, and then we'll have 30% that can listen to us today.
I might just add on to that, given it is being recorded, if you do have questions that are a bit, may require a bit of privacy, or, you don't want to be identified with it potentially, it may be advisable that you, first of all, contact member support with your issue, but if you do want to ask it in the chat so that we can respond to it in this discussion, it may be advisable to potentially anonymize your Zoom name.
Excuse me, I think I've watched the number go up. Chris, there are some people in the waiting room waiting to be admitted, I think, isn't?
Okay. There we go.
There we go.
Sorry.
So there's a few more come through then.
Perfect.
I hope it didn't mind.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you for that.
That's, I think.
There's a lot of people coming through, yeah.
I'll keep an eye on that, but for everyone who's just joined, we've just gone through introductions here. So my name is Chris. With us we have Terry, who also works at Red Union, advising with industrial relations issues, including bullying. We have Margaret Gilbert, the president of the NPAQ, and we also have Vicky, who runs a Stop Bullying advocacy group for nurses and midwives. But we might get underway now that I've admitted everyone, and yeah, we'll get started.
So I guess what we'll start off with is actually defining what bullying is, because there seems to be some subjectivity around the definition. So we'll have a panel discussion, basically looking at a definition or a working definition. So I might start with you,
Okay,
Vicky.
Cool. So bullying, I guess, is defined by ongoing repetitive behaviour that highlights a pattern, and it is there to coerce, intimidate. It is also there, often it's directed at people who may be more vulnerable. And I think I wrote down here that the Oxford Dictionary states, a person who uses their strength or power to frighten or hurt weaker people. And so for me, I want to get it out there at the beginning. There is lots of bullying going on within our profession. However, it's not peer-to-peer very often. It is actually a result of management action, which may not be bullying. It probably is a lot more like breaching your industrial rights under general protections. So yeah, bullying is ongoing, repetitive, meant to hurt meant to demean and can be done in many ways.
Thank
That's
you.
my view.
Thank you, Vicky. Do we have any additional comments?
Yeah,
on that?
I might jump in on that. If you just give me a moment. I can just see some people have mentioned that there's an echo with the speaker, so we might try and resolve that. If I just try and move this.
Would you like us to come close?
You might just want to come close to my apologies.
No, all right.
And it's also beam of the light is apparently proving distracting. So I do apologise for that. It is sometimes temperamental. Sometimes we find the video quality is better with the lights, and then other days, for whatever reason, the camera seems to pick up the light more. But please let us know if there's any difficulties. I certainly agree with everything that Vicky has said thus far. I might just sort of give a bit of a background on sort of your legal footing in terms of bullying matters and
Absolutely.
what constitutes bullying matters. Now, in the Fair Work system, they define it under section 789 of the Act, which is where it's got two limbs, two elements. So that's where an individual or group of individuals repeatedly behaves unreasonably towards a worker or a group of workers at work, and the behaviour creates a risk to health and safety. So generally with bullying complaints, you can normally file them or request to make a complaint on a number of grounds. Now that could be the bullying provisions in the Fair Work Act, or if you're a public servant in the Industrial Relations Act. But bullying is it is a workplace health and safety issue because it affects your ability to competently perform the job at work. So when you make a complaint about bullying, even if it's you think it's a little bit trivial, by doing that, you've exercised a workplace right because you're complaining about a workplace health and safety issue. So while it can be understandable that you may not want to pursue it because it seems trivial to you at the moment, it is worthwhile getting in touch with the union, or indeed just making a complaint, even if you don't want it to go much further, because you may be grateful that you exercise that workplace right now rather than later when it gets uncontrollable, because as we'll get into later, these processes can take some time to get through. And often with workplace bullying, it's sort of these incidental little incidents that on their own seem unremarkable, but then you sort of reach boiling point, and it's hard to rectify that issue with your employer because the employer needs to afford natural justice to the alleged perpetrator. So it's important that you're aware of these rights, and when you think something might be workplace bullying, contact your union or take a look at the. I recommend the anti-bullying bench book on, with Fair Work, so you can sort of get an idea of your legal footing, and even if it isn't enough to satisfy getting a workplace bullying application through Fair Work, you can still make a complaint, and by making the complaint, you've exercised the workplace right.
That's right. And I'm sure Terry wants to speak, but I wanted to just also say that, if you're looking to resolve bullying in the workplace, you've got workplace health and safety, you've got your industrial law, but you've also got your professional practice obligations to call upon, because at the moment, a lot of this behaviour is affecting nurses and their ability, and midwives, their ability to provide care, which is what's really probably causing nurses so much stress right now.
we might get into that a bit later when we sort of talk about the different grounds, because as you said, there's many grounds that you can take with these, and the first step is usually just making the informal complaint directly through your line manager, and then if it keeps on happening, we can sort of work out the jurisdiction and the appropriate legal avenue to take if you're not happy with the outcome.
Yes.
Terry, do you have anything to add at all? Terry, I think you just might be on mute there, mate. Give me a second. Yeah, it still says you're on mute, Terry. Give me a second.
There we go. Something
Cool.
happened there. Wouldn't let me unmute. You didn't want me to speak. No, that's okay. Look, I agree with all those, everything that's just been mentioned before. That's absolutely right. I'll give another aspect of it, and this, I guess, comes from my investigation background. Now, this only really applies to people working in the public sector. So, and I'm talking about Queensland in particular. Now, how it works in other states, well, I couldn't say that I'm too sure about that because I don't work in those other states, but it's probably similar. So in Queensland, for example, you work for a state government or an agency that answers to the Crime and Corruption Commission, then bullying can constitute corrupt conduct. If it's been done by a supervisor or manager in a position of power, because they call that a breach of trust. So it might reach that threshold of corrupt conduct. Now, the reason why I mentioned that is obviously for defining bullying, but also I've noticed going through some of the questions that have been asked, this continual, I guess, the same type of questions about I'm being bullied by my manager. So bullying can constitute corrupt conduct if it's being done by a manager to a subordinate. If it's peer-to-peer, that's probably not going to reach the threshold. Yeah. But it depends, but usually it won't. But if it involves a manager, particularly a senior manager, the CCC will view that as a breach of trust, which is one of their definitions of corrupt conduct. So I'll just sort of just add that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We might explore that a bit more when we talk about the different complaints that could be made, but in particular, and I'm not entirely sure with the CCC ground, but many of these, you know, when it comes to filing an application, be it in the QIRC or the Fair Work Commission, they require you to exhaust the internal grievance procedure. And I'd recommend that if you are going to report to the CCC, it should probably be after that you've exhausted or at least explored some of the internal grievance procedure. I'm not sure if the CCC requires it, Terry, but I know that with most of these, you want to use that internal grievance procedure, even if you know that it's a bit tokenistic and you know what the result is going to be, just so you don't get knocked back later when you try and do either a public service appeal or if you're in the Fair Work system trying to get a stop bullying order. It definitely pays to use that internal grievance procedure.
And can I just add to that? One of the big things with all the nurses and midwives that I have contact with, and I'm on lots of forums besides NAMIBA and NAMAS, one of the big things is that they don't understand what evidence is required. And so it's about learning what your rights are, what you can say, what you should say, and how to gather that evidence in a very respectful, meaningful way. It's quite easy once you know how, because I imagine to go to the AHPRA or anywhere, they want evidence. And so it's also, I think, good practice for nurses to understand how they cover themselves also when these sorts of behaviours start. So
yeah, I might just jump in there. So the threshold is probably not well understood. So the threshold for investigating corrupt conduct is reasonable suspicion. So you don't need to have all the evidence to initiate one of these investigations, because quite like honestly, like it's very rarely that is all the evidence there. And that's the reason why an investigation is conducted. But what should be happening is that when, for example, bullying is recognised in the workplace, and we're talking about Queensland government here, public sector, what should be happening is that the management there, if they see that it's happened, for example, between a manager to a subordinate, they are required to notify the CCC themselves as a matter of potential corrupt conduct. The CCC will then assess it and advise whether or not they believe it reaches that threshold. So hopefully that answers that question.
Can I ask a question of Terry? Terry, do you think then that this is probably very much underreported?
Well, most definitely, yes, and mainly because people don't understand that that it can be bullying. So the bullying can be corrupt conduct. That's the point that I'm making here.
Yeah.
And everyone that's asking questions in the chat, feel free to keep asking them. We will get to them. We just sort of have some questions that we had posed to us prior to this that we'll try and get through a few of them first. But obviously, you've got questions that are interesting you, and we may already discuss them by the time we get to your questions. So we might move on before we start reinventing the wheel. I think that was a big response to that.
I think this topic is something that, you know, could be discussed for hours and hours. And I hope, certainly for myself, I'm only giving a brief overview because there isn't enough time to go into all of the nitty gritty of, you know, the importance of following policy and procedures and holding your employer accountable and making sure they follow the policy and procedures just like you have to.
Yeah.
I would just that in the workplace, particularly in Queensland Government, Queensland Health, there is the risk man, which each and every member of staff has access to. And from my perspective, as a previous manager, we would ask staff to actually make a record. So we have that record, and for each and every instance that this occurs. So therefore, it's a concrete line of communication that is looked at within the organisation. Sometimes people say things or write it on a piece of paper and that actually gets lost. So Queensland Health does have that mechanism for each and every one of us to report on. And also, I was just going to mention about the importance, and can't stress enough, is to maintain a professional diary and file note with date, time, place, who was there, and sometimes it may even be down to what the person is wearing, and have that done in chronological order. Because I understand sometimes some of these cases that go to the Commission, nurses don't have that evidence. So it is imperative that you keep that. And if you're working in an area, you maintain that diary for however long that you are in that employment, and for a number of years after, should there be any issues, the legal guys will be able to tell you the constraints around that. So it really is important. Everybody is pushed for time, but to actually take the time to actually stop and do that, because you have to protect your professional reputation and also your registration, and that goes a long way to assist. Yeah.
Can I just add to? I've been to a few presentations about Riskman. The big thing about Riskman is used in private sector as well. They don't use it probably to the full capacity, but one of the big things is I call it going to the Riskman abyss. So it's really good if when you fill in a Riskman, you make sure you get your own copy or you get the number, because if it's 4 or 5 years down the track or 2 years down the track, you won't remember those details.
And you know, as is often the case as well, if you're reporting bullying and you're away from work, either because of an incident related to the bullying or for whatever other reason, and you don't have access to that, it does just become quite difficult. So filing that sort of circumstantial evidence as it arises is good, because it allows you to, as Marg said, you know, prepare a complaint in chronological order. You know, when you're writing your first letter of complaint to your boss, you know, the most difficult thing is finding out where it all unraveled. It's easy to pour the emotion into it, but I think, you know, that's my, whether I'm writing a letter to an employer or filing something in the Commission, you got to start off with a chronological order of events. So, you know, by having that circumstantial evidence and evidence as it arises, and keeping a copy of it, because you may at a later date be locked out of the system that, you know, was first filed in.
Yes.
You know, you've done half the job.
Can I also add, often nurses don't realise, and midwives don't realise that sometimes you are not going to have a personal response back. There are thousands and thousands of Riskman. I recommend you go back and look, because at the bottom of Riskman, it says what action has been taken. They may not tell you directly, but it's really worth it for you to go and see if actually they have done something with the risk that you have identified, because that's what Riskman is. It's identifying the risk so that they can mitigate it and stop it from happening again.
We might move on to another question. I don't know if you want to pick one, Margaret, or
I was just going to ask if we could basically define reasonable management action versus bullying, because sometimes the money gets watered from a management to the team members. And if we could perhaps look at
absolutely. So this concept of reasonable management action sort of has, it's both the same concept, but in what it sort of, it arises with work cover matters, which I'll get to in a moment, and it also arises with bullying complaints. Now, I did mention before, that the bullying complaint needs to, repeatedly occur against the worker unreasonably, and the behaviour creates a risk to work health and safety. Well, the cutout of that is that if it was reasonable management action involved in there, you eventually just won't have a basis for the complaint, or you might file it and it gets knocked back. Now, reasonable management action is sort of this concept of discipline and orders, so lawful workplace directions, which just naturally arise between the employee and supervisor or manager relationship. The difficult, you might know that your supervisor or your manager is making you do sort of arbitrary things or disciplining you out of spite. But if there is an actual basis for them to be doing that, you're going to run into difficulties there. So the appropriate thing to do when you're running a complaint that has, the risk of them claiming reasonable management action is to either look for a different basis of the complaint, or to at the very least have your own contested version of events that was filed contemporaneously when you were, show caused, or whatever the situation was if you've been disciplined. Certainly having a chat to your union, because it really does depend on the facts. I understand that there is a lot of give and take in employment relationships, and you might feel it is fair to act up in relation to a manager who's really unjustly giving it to you, but that you've got to understand that isn't seen in a positive light when it comes to these matters. So you may want to try and cease that behaviour first and sort of cross your T's and dot your I's, and then make a complaint in relation to bullying events that have occurred since then. It's really a case-by-case basis. Now, with work cover matters, it's a similar concept. It's really sort of a cutout for psychological injury. So I don't have the exact statistics on me, but I know that psychological injury claims with work cover often get knocked back. I think it's something like 2/3 of the time, or potentially even more. And sometimes it comes down to evidence linking it to the workplace. The other main issue is reasonable management action. So sort of you might claim that a disciplinary process has left you with a lot of stress. Well, unless you can sort of challenge that disciplinary action, which can be hard to do over the span of however, especially if you're in the public service, it takes many months to do that through the commission. It can be hard to make that claim. So you need to be aware of that, and ultimately talk about that after you've spoken to your doctor and gotten your work cover claim prepared. Talk about that with your union so you can ideally prepare a version of events that is suitable, come up with a rebuttal or indeed work out a plan to try and challenge the disciplinary action in the first place, and then subsequently pursue work cover or it could be back pay of entitlements if you end up using it during that period. There's a myriad of things that you can do, but you do need to be aware of that when one of the alleged bullying incidents relates to disciplinary action or giving you lawful directions. You need to be very careful in how you sort of formulate your complaint.
I'm aware that we're chatting like we haven't forgotten you, Terry.
No, that's okay. I'm just listening, and everybody else.
All right, well, given you've got the investigative knowledge, I thought if I just explain, because I'm hearing a lot about nurses and midwives and students, what's reasonable, what's unreasonable. We use it a lot in union world, and we use it a lot in health. So to me, unreasonable is not guided by or based on good sense. And it is also beyond the limits of the acceptability or fairness. So it may not be unlawful, but it is unreasonable. And I wanted to say in relation to complaints, because often perpetrators of these behaviours might call you into a meeting or tap you by surprise. You really need to know, it's really important that we educate ourselves on natural justice and procedural fairness, both as a victim. So if allegations, are given to you either informally or formally, you really need to be given full disclosure before you start responding, and that includes when, where, who, what. But it applies if you are putting in a complaint as well. So if you're going to put in a complaint to your CN or your NUM, you need to make sure that you can provide those details so that you are taken seriously. Then that's why your diary and your emails and your risk man all go towards showing that picture. The other thing is a lot of nurses say, well, I emailed my manager and I didn't get a response. Doesn't matter. The important thing is that you've documented it. Well, obviously, if you got a response, it's better, but don't panic about that if you don't, because it shows that you have sent an email and that you have kept it. So if you use your employer email, by the way, don't send it to anyone else except yourself at home and print it off, because they can track these things. So yes, so natural justice and procedural fairness, I think, is really important principles that you know when these things are happening.
It's an important point, Vicky. And I would also mention that should you have a meeting with a manager, and after that meeting, basically write response emails. I think basically something similar to thank you for your time in discussing this matter. My understanding of what was discussed was, and the outcome was from that meeting, and should they have any issue in your comprehension, that can be cleared up, and also you maintain a paper trail.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%, having conducted quite a few investigations. And I'll just touch on that point. So with the notes, so just quickly, just ducking back to reasonable management, and hopefully what we're doing here is we're going to answer, there's a whole heap of questions coming through on our meeting chats, but hopefully with our discussion, they will answer quite a lot of those. So reasonable management, now this is the #1 excuse that's used by management when they're bullying staff underneath them to get out of an investigation. And it's what they go to. Oh, well, this is a reasonable direction. Well, this worker's no good, I'm performancing this worker, blah, 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 blah. So as an investigator, you have to be objective and go, all right, so you have to consider that, okay, are these reasonable management actions that are being taken? But quite often, and this is where it comes into keeping notes, which I think is a very good point that's been made here, is that sometimes it's the context in which it's been delivered. So for example, a manager saying, okay, can you please go and, do this, okay? As it depends on the way you're spoken to. can also be the bullying factor. So they will say, well, I just gave a reasonable direction, you know, because I needed this patient to be blah, blah, blah. But it's the way you said it, and, you know, and where you said it, and in front of other people that you said it. So it's very important to have all those details to actually, you know, negate some of this, you know, sidestepping of reasonable management. The other thing is too, and following on from some of the stuff as well, is with the note taking. Now I've you know, spoken to lots of managers over the years about so-called issues that they had in the workplace and how they've spoken to their staff member who's, you know, might be under investigation, because quite often, you know, managers will make complaints against their own staff, or other staff will make complaints to them about other staff. And they'll then bring up this, well, I've had a conversation with that staff member about these issues. And so they're fully aware that the behaviour that they're doing is not appropriate. And the first thing I ask for is, well, where's your notes? Oh, well, we didn't make any. Sorry, it doesn't exist. The conversation didn't exist, right? Or they'll go, oh, here they are. Here's all the notes that I wrote, you know? And I'll go, okay, so where's the acknowledgement from the staff member that that's an accurate recollection of the conversation you had with them? Oh, I don't have it. Sorry, I'm not going to accept that as being gospel, right? So this is what's so important, where it was mentioned before about sending an email. This is the discussion we had. This is what you said, and this is what the outcome was. I think that's very good advice, because that way then it can't be brought up later as some type of dirt file, you know, that managers put together. And I've seen it. I've seen this happen, where they construct this dirt file against an employee that they don't like, that they're bullying, and it's all lies. So a good point that was made before about that. So yes, just take notes and make sure that, you know, when you have those discussions with your manager, or, you know, particularly about, you know, bullying, things like that, that it's documented with an email, because it becomes traceable.
And just on that, it's just generally good advice whenever you have an issue regarding discipline, because the thing to keep in mind, if you're a nurse in any aged care or hospital facility, chances are you have swipe access and many details of your job, you know, recorded electronically. Even where your employer or your manager isn't making detailed notes of conversations they have with staff, like Terry just mentioned, they already have the jump on you, in the sense that they have a bunch of information that they just collect as part of their systems anyway. So, you know, you're already on the back foot. The least that you can do is sort of follow up and reply and make contemporaneous records, where, you know, you can, you know, emailing immediately after is the best case scenario. Because if they don't respond, doesn't really matter, and, you know, you're keeping both parties accountable in terms of the true record of what was said. And also, you know, it can sort of put the other party on notice if they're
Yes.
if they're thinking of playing silly buggers with you. You know, they know that you're at least keeping a contemporaneous record, which in most cases usually helps. Sometimes it can accelerate things, but really the important thing for your legal standing is to make contemporaneous records.
Can I just add something? Sorry, Terry, I was just going to say, I'm not sure if you're aware, but certainly there's been a lot of conversation in Queensland. So again, I'm assuming that if it's not utilised around the country, it will be. But certainly in Queensland Health, they're using file notes to record those informal chats. And there's a heap of nurses who are quite panicked about that. They actually should feel comforted by that, because if you don't agree with what's been put in that file note, it's your right to amend it. So it doesn't mean it's going to be used in a formal way. Yes, they may use it if there is a pattern of behaviour established, or they're escalating, you know, disciplinary matters. But I want everyone to be reassured those file notes aren't, I believe, not necessarily a bad thing. They may be used down the track. you know, in a disingenuous way, but
I think they're great, but only as to what we were saying, you need to make, if you're going to need to make edits, you need to do it contemporaneously. But often, they'll usually nowadays where they're making file notes, they'll often have a independent third staff member in there making those notes while you have the conversation. So it is good. I quite like the practice, but you need to be doubly sure that you, if you're concerned with what was mentioned, that you make mention of that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'll just make the point on that is a couple of points. So that the first one about, you know, making notes. So a good manager will make notes themselves and they'll have their staff read those notes and, yep, do you agree with this? We had this discussion. Yes, they will instigate that. So as an investigator, when you're looking at that and you see a manager that does that, that's proactive, that gives you a bit of confidence that, okay, so all right, maybe this manager's doing the right thing. Now, it's not always the case, but generally speaking, like, you know, good managers will do that. And so, you know, these things can be sorted out. The other thing about file notes is, like, yes, they are a great idea, but they need to be acknowledged, because I have seen it many times where, and that file note needs to make up part of some central register, like a HR or something like that. Or it can be at a local level where, you know, the director of nursing might keep these things, or the manager might keep these things. But the main thing what I'm getting at here is that, you know, you don't want the situation where managers start creating dirt files. And I've seen them where they've created a whole heap of notes about a staff member that have allegedly occurred from a whole heap of complaints about other staff. And yet that person, you know, has not even been made aware that there's been these complaints made about them, but yet the manager's already formed an opinion that they're guilty because of all these complaints that have been received. Now, a good manager should always, when they get a complaint about a staff member, approach that staff member and say, listen, I've received this complaint, you know, what can you tell me about it? Okay, and make a note about that, and then it's filed, right? So the file note is only going to ever be any good as long as the employee that file note relates to is aware that it exists.
Yes. Yeah.
I might, just before we move on to the next question, I can see what the others were talking about in relation to that light in the middle of the screen. I'm just going to see, I'm just going to quickly get technical help, because I know the tripod is a bit temperamental. So give me one moment and we'll resume the question soon, and we'll actually, we might dip into the chat soon and take a look at the questions.
Yeah, there's I like to say, and I guess I wanted to be able to say, in relation to when you are escalating bullying or any other matter, is you can do nothing, you can do something, or you can do everything. Doing nothing, hopefully whatever is going on will just fade away. Doing something actually might get you in a bit of bother, because you're raising your hand, speaking out, but then maybe with a bit of pushback from your employer representative, you back off. And that sends a message then to your manager that with a bit of pushback, a bit of inappropriate behaviour, you are going to become compliant. And that's what they want. If they know you are willing to do everything to resolve this and escalate it, and you know the various regulatory frameworks, then you're probably going to be in a much better position of resolving the conflict in the workplace, is my view. So you have to know, I guess, have a plan. If you're going to put a complaint, how far are you willing to go with that complaint? And I think reasonable management action, we've spoken a lot about. One of the big things is often nurses feel that they're, you know, sent off to do tasks and work in other areas as a punishment. Again, an employer representative can direct you as long as you have the authority, you have the competency, and you have the education. So, for example, if your manager tells you to go and do something and you think it's punitive, and you don't have the necessary competency or education, don't just say no, you can't do that. You actually should articulate why you can't do that, so that anyone, again, down the track, if it escalated, anybody reading the notes, the files and everything else will get absolutely an overview of what's been happening. So if you articulate to a manager, I can't do that because I don't have the authority, and they tell you to suck it up and do it, that's a whole different thing. And we'll talk about that. That's then about your professional practice obligations, NMBA standards. And certainly in Queensland, there are fines under Health Practitioner National Law if you incite or encourage a registrant to act in an unprofessional way. So again, there are lots of things that you should be aware of in relation to reasonable management action. Did you get your light fixed?
I think we're good.
Oh yeah, look, perfect.
Did you want to delve into the chat, Chris, or?
Is this just in relation to AHPRA, or I missed?
No,
the first
I
part
was
of
just why I took the opportunity while you weren't here to talk about, you know, you can do nothing, do something, or do everything, but also reasonable management action might involve being sent to do a task. It appears it's just a task and you're a nurse, but actually you don't have the authority or the competency or the education. You've got to have all three to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, you don't want to be getting in trouble for that issue.
No, because then your employer has a right to discipline you because you breached your professional practice obligations. Even if they knew it was happening and it's systemic, you will still be the one that potentially might face disciplinary action or reporting.
Do you want me to run through some of the other?
I think so, yeah. So I think a lot of those questions will cover some of these other questions as well, Chris.
Yeah. I'll run through some of the pre-prepared ones, and then we'll jump into the ones that are left in the chat, basically, that we didn't cover. Question that was asked was, how many warnings does a nurse or colleague who continues to bully receive before they are terminated? Do they receive 3 warnings and then termination? I'll be pretty brief with this. This whole 3 warning rule is a bit of a myth.
Yes.
It is up to the employer. In the public sector, generally, there's a much more formal process. Where they think it's really serious, you'll be suspended with pay to begin with. I don't really hear of summary terminations anymore for bullying in the public sector. It can occur in the private sector, but generally employers really want to, especially with bullying matters where it can be a bit hearsay until they sort of corroborate the stories with other people. Or have hard evidence. Generally, your employer in the Fair Work system. So if you're a private sector employee, they can only terminate for summarily dismiss you. So dismiss you on the spot and not pay out your notice period, where you've committed serious misconduct. And that has to be pretty serious bullying for that to happen with pretty serious hard evidence. There's no sort of hard and fast rule. But generally, because of that, your employer will want to show some semblance of a natural justice process. You know, you should be afforded the right to respond and so forth. And to be totally honest with you, with most bullying cases, because most complainants haven't had the opportunity to compile the evidence in the way that we've just discussed, or because of other reasons, even in the private sector, I would say, unless it's a small business, pretty rare for someone to be sacked on the first incident of bullying. Generally, they'll establish, they'll try and do some sort of performance management or try and mediate the dispute between the parties. I mean, that exists commonly in the public sector, but in the public sector, it's much more drawn out. And, ultimately, I would say it is more difficult to try and get to be disciplined in the public sector if you're just a lay person making a complaint because of all the processes that have to be undertaken. But conversely, it can also be quite debilitating in the public sector when you're experiencing management-led bullying because of all the resources that they have available to you and sort of the overwhelmingness of the system in terms of responding to complaints, being aware of your limitation dates and so forth. So I would say it's pretty rare that someone is dismissed on the spot in both the public and private sector, especially in nursing, where it's usually not small business employers. But, you can't be too careful. You can't be too careful. So if you are if you do have a complaint made against you, you need to be compiling evidence, you need to be responding as soon as possible, and you need to be responding once you have received the questions. They might not want to give it to you in writing, but the principles of natural justice mean being given the evidence and being afforded the opportunity to prepare a response. It's called the hearing rule. And essentially, even if they're not willing to give you a copy of it in paper form, that's fine. There's not too much we can do about that. But if they want you to respond on the spot, you shouldn't do that. You need time to consider the evidence that's before you. So, you know, if they refuse it to you in paper form and they say, no, you have to come to this meeting, or you need to reply back to them, that's fine. But I will want to bring a support person, which can be an uninvolved staff member. Typically, I don't recommend that. It can be a family or friend, or it can be a union representative if you give them enough notice. And you'll want to say to them from the get-go that, you know, if you're not giving this to me in paper form, just letting you know not to waste anybody's time here, that I'm not going to respond to the allegations on the day. I need time to process it and, you know, review it, because these are often complex matters. You know, they're often things with a lengthy timeline. They could be people complaining about an incident from 3 months ago. So it shouldn't be expected of you to respond on the spot. And even if you think you can, trust me, don't. Everyone thinks that they can be very suave and smooth in the hot, when they're going to be in the hot seat. But trust me, if you do that, you will probably, even if you're totally innocent, whatever, you will probably go back and kick yourself for not responding to it in a different light. So you definitely need that time. No one's superhuman. You need the time. I probably would struggle on the spot if I was ever in that situation. So certainly get the time to review the information when that occurs.
I was going to say, in relation to consequences, there is a real fear that when this is commenced against you, that you're going to be sacked. And I do believe employers want you to feel that fear. But I actually don't think there are that many that are sacked. What happens is they resign. And they resign and the issues aren't resolved. And I think that's why we've got this, what Tammy, who is the founder of NAMIBA, says is it's an epidemic. And unfortunately, I hope I don't offend, but we as nurses and midwives have allowed this to happen over these past 10, 15 years. We've turned away. We're so thankful it's not us. We won't support colleagues. We won't be witnesses. We don't want to be involved. But in the end, patients are suffering and residents are suffering, and we're not fulfilling our professional practice obligations. And my view is, if you can no longer be a patient advocate, you do need to consider, is nursing still for you? Because I know of deaths where nurses have come and said, I know I contributed to this because I didn't speak out. I didn't follow the escalation pathway. And for a nurse to know they've contributed to a death or an injury is devastating.
Yes.
You know, it really is. It's never mind going through AHPRA. You feel that sense of.
And you can make anonymous complaints.
Yeah.
You know, it's and if you have concerns that it is actually, it's not affecting your safety in the workplace and your personal well-being, as you said, if it's impacting on patient outcomes, ultimately it's a bit of a different standard in the AHPRA, the Nursing Midwifery Board of Australia's Code of Conduct, but it is still reportable. I don't believe it's a mandatory reporting offence, other than where it at the time causes immediate significant risk to the patient. A lot of incidents are mandatory reportable. Bullying isn't usually one of them. But even if you feel like you're getting nowhere with your employer, if you think that it's it's not affecting you, you can keep getting on with it, but it is going to affect patients, this dispute between 2 other colleagues, report it to the NMBA. That's all entirely anonymous. Complaints to employers, they are meant to handle them anonymously, but sometimes they won't. I can tell you right now, one of the biggest problems with AHPRA that I deal with is that we do get anonymous complaints regarding conduct, but that is, by design. It is sometimes annoying for me when I'm assisting someone responding to these complaints, but it is by design so that if there is a genuine safety risk, report it to the Nursing Midwifery Board, report it to OHO, report it to AHPRA, because those are all entirely anonymous. And you can prepare your report in such a way that it may not reveal too much to the complainant, to the respondent, of who made the complaint.
Can I have it, because this is like, to me, this is something, the code of conduct for nurses and midwives. Everybody should know it. That's our responsibility. And if you're unsure how to escalate and document if anything's affecting patients or residents, or why you do it, have a read of Principle 2, and particularly 2.1c, because it specifically says in our code of conduct we must document and escalate. And when a nurse doesn't document and escalate, they breach their code of conduct. So whenever you're raising a workplace issue that you can lead back to patient safety, I say before it has to get to making a complaint to OHO or AHPRA, you actually say, as a nurse, I am complying with this standard. And then you follow it up with an email. And if your NUM or employer representative ignores that, then you go to the next step. And that would be following policy and procedure, I imagine. But certainly our code of conduct has this, as does it have bullying, which is 3.4 in the nurses code of conduct. Just so we have written, so NAMIBA representatives have written to NMBA. We have highlighted that the code of conduct doesn't explain how to report. Nurses don't know where to go. So again, we have all these wonderful frameworks, but we're not linking them. We're not utilising them. We're not ensuring compliance with them. So this is why all stakeholders need to get together to address this, because to me, a lot of this is just words, unless it's your employer reporting you for breaching this, which happens frequently.
Yeah, and I will let poor old Terry.
Yeah.
But
oh look, no, you're doing a great job, saying a lot of things I would have said. Just a couple of points. So one thing I found and I've done a few investigations with bullying, particularly around managers bullying staff. One thing you'll find is that bullying is not the only behaviour that they're engaged in, right? They'll be doing other wrong things as well. It usually 9 times out of 10 when you conduct one of these investigations, you discover that they're doing a whole heap of other things that are breaching the policies, and they usually get sacked on that, not actually the bullying itself. Although the bullying might be what started the investigation. So be mindful of that. So if you've got a manager, that's a bully, and just pay attention, what else are they doing? Because I can guarantee you they'll be doing other stuff that management above them will want to know about. So you can use that. And just go about it the right way. Yeah. The other thing is, and I think this is very important, because I've been in a situation, where I've been bullied, in the past, and I found that having a support person that I could speak with about bullying was so helpful. Now I'm a trained investigator, so I know how to respond to bosses and things like that. And keep it together per se, but even myself, like you get emotionally involved in these things, and you will write something to your boss that may not come across as being appropriate. It wasn't intended that way, but it's just the way you're feeling. And so what I would do in my situation is, I had a friend of mine that I would get him to read my stuff first before I send it away, right? And he would edit it, right, and take out all the emotion out of what I was writing. So you can use it. I guess the union can provide that service as well. So, but the point I'm getting is that it's very helpful to actually have someone else to, that you can take with you on that journey, if you call it that, to provide you with some sort of, outside. They're not involved in it themselves. They can give you that objectivity. Because as Chris was saying before, you want to be careful what you write to management, because they'll use that against you, So it's good to have someone review your work before you submit it into them.
That's actually part of what I'm doing for nursing and midwifery advocacy solutions and I'm offering myself as a support person. So I'm not an industrial representative. I'm certainly not pretending to be, but I'm certainly reviewing timelines, reviewing responses and saying, you know what, I'm happy to come along. In Southeast Queensland, I can attend in person because it is important. And again, I may not be there as an industrial representative, but by goodness, I know when to stop the meeting, give them a kick under the table, say to be quiet, shall we go outside and have a quick chat, you know, so that they are kept on track, because there is an urge to spill everything at those sorts of meetings. And then before you know it, you may well have said something to incriminate yourself or support their accusations.
Is that so important? When our members open a ticket online and they have a case manager allocated and may on occasion be their support person, they will actually look at the issue, look at how it will be handled, and they will indicate to you when perhaps it might be discretion is the better part of valor not to say anything, to stop the meeting and then to regroup and then go back. And it's a fantastic service that our case managers offer from our perspective, because we're here to deal with those issues, and the team then they do a debrief to actually look at the quality assurance, how things could be handled better. So we're refining all of the time. So we've got that from our perspective, and as you know, Vicky's saying, there are other avenues for support persons. So people that you are quite happy and comfortable with. Sometimes you've got that positive and negative transference that so-and-so might remind you of your grandmother or your father or whatever in a negative capacity. So that might not be the person for you. And we're quite well aware of those psychodynamics, and we can change managers. So it's basically can be horses for courses, we say. So yeah.
I was just looking at some of these questions as well, Chris, that I'm sure you'd be able to say, because there seems to be this theme about, is there a register of bullies?
Yeah,
which
we might quickly fly through these, so that way we can get to these. So there is no formal register of it. It's sort of difficult. In terms of the statistics behind it, the Fair Work Ombudsman doesn't actually even publish how many stop bullying order applications are made. QIRC, I don't believe, does it, because I think you have to go through the internal grievance procedure and then you file a public service appeal, which bullying isn't the specific ground. But Safe Work Australia has actually been compiling information on this, and they read a report recently that something like it was a couple, it might have been it was either 2019 and 2020, that reported workplace bullying incidents had been up 40% over the previous reporting period. I can't remember what that was. And that's out of a comparison of 30-something developed European countries, Australia ranked 5th or 6th in terms of workplace bullying. Now that can be down to a number of factors. I think the obvious thing is it's going up. We see it more and more often. It can also potentially be down to the fact that we compared to other jurisdictions, we have better reporting mechanisms and people might feel more comfortable to report. But I think at the end of the day, the important thing is that people don't feel like there's adequate outcomes happening. And it is a balance of natural justice. But I think the most important thing, as you said, is for us to voluminously report these as they occur, even where they don't personally affect us. But to answer the question, no, there isn't a register. The only way you'd ever find out that information is if someone had to appeal their discipline to a court or something like that. Even when people get conditions on their AHPRA registration, it usually just says the condition itself. It doesn't say what incident caused it. So unfortunately not. But depending on which way you look at it, maybe that's fortunate for you if you ever got a vexatious complaint. And that's really,
that's it, isn't it?
That's the, you know, the sort of what hangs in the balance here is ensuring natural justice, procedural fairness, but also ensuring that, you know, people feel like their complaint is appropriately heard, and that they can come to a resolution in these matters. You know, we've talked a lot about being sacked and this, that, or the other, but sometimes the best solution is just to have an organised sit down between third parties and just, you know, work things out, because things have just petered out of control and they were all just over one tiny little thing that in hindsight just sounds absolutely ridiculous. This doesn't apply to everyone. I'm sure there's plenty of big bullying cases that are going on.
The other thing that really is, if a bully is a manager, they're not just doing it to you. So why not act collectively on this? Like I'm focusing on individuals now, but certainly when I've worked for a union, you hear the stories. There are many. So, you know, you could start by putting things on a staff meeting agenda, and then nurses go, but we don't have them. Well, you need to ask for one. It's how can you resolve workplace issues if you don't have a staff meeting? And again, most facilities, public and private, unfortunately not so much aged care, they have nursing forums where this is the place to bring these unresolved issues. So there is so much that we can use that is underused to resolve things before you have to, you know, write serious complaints, which for many victims of behaviour, they're not mentally able. They don't have the inclination. They just want to forget about it. But by golly, is it devastating to your psyche if you are treated in that way, and leaving isn't necessarily going to fix it. I like to say, if you're going to leave, go out with a bang and make your manager think, because there are consequences. Some of these questions about consequences for bullies, let me tell you, if it's professional practice related, you've got your code of conduct, you've got inciting someone, that's up to $30,000 if I remember, in a fine. Same as adverse action. Again, it is a long process. You don't want to have to go through a court for that. It can take years, but again, there are financial consequences.
And in the public sector, when you're making these applications, and in Queensland, in the public sector, there's a whole suite of applications that you can make depending on what's happened to you. You've got adverse action, you've got bullying, you've got public service appeals, you've got work safe complaints, you've got complaints to the regulator, AHPRA, and, you know, the thing, you've also got human rights complaints now. Those are a big one in Queensland. And where these matters start going to a tribunal, generally with these sort of smaller matters, rather than big, you know, complex legal issue questions, the ones that derive from fact, the department will often go to either internal employment relations people or to Crown Law, rather than to outsource it to larger firms. And they're all public servants as well. And I mean, they will, to the best of their ability, try and defend the case on behalf of the person that, you know, you allege has been bullying, if they're a manager or whatever. But ultimately, if they have concerns about the conduct, they're going to follow that up as well. So, I mean, these are all independent branches. I believe employment relations is separated from HR entirely in Queensland Health, as far as I'm aware. So, you know, just raising attention to it in that matter, even if your complaint doesn't succeed, or even if you walk away from it, explore, definitely shop venues, shop jurisdictions, and talk to your union, your industrial advocate, about what might work best for you. Because if you are walking away, there's a number of things that you can do. And, you know, depending on what level of recourse you potentially, you know, even though, as we said, your position is protected if you make a complaint, but just sort of be, you know, depending on what level of recourse you're willing to bear or suffer with, we can sort of work out a plan for you. And, you know, we might look at multiple jurisdictions.
Thank you, Chris.
I just wanted to, I've just seen some of the questions coming in the chat, and there's an interesting one here about AHPRA don't do anything about bullying, and they state it as an in-house problem. That's interesting. They do, and I know because I worked at AHPRA as an investigator, so I know how they work. And I actually had a case one time. It was a psychologist, and she was a senior psychologist, and she was bullying the junior psychologist. And she got done for that, for bullying under the code of conduct. And the board took action and imposed conditions. So it does happen. But again, you know, you've got to have the evidence, and And in this case, we did. So I just wanted to quickly address that one. The other one about the registers, yeah, look, these are primarily HR matters. So is there going to be a register for bullying? No, there's not, but it'll be on, for example, if a particular person, employee, manager in particular, if they had quite a number of bullying complaints made against them, they will be on a HR file. And I've seen it where investigations have been initiated by the organisation, by HR, because they're sick and tired of getting these complaints about bullying, about this manager. So, and I know that because I've worked in ethical standard units, and I've worked in Queensland Health, and I've worked in those integrity units there. So that's an option for people if you feel that you're getting bullied by your manager. And again, what I would do is just check with the support person with the union to just to get some clarity and make sure that, it is bullying and it's not something that you're perceiving as that, right? And then you can contact your ethical standards unit if you're in the government sector there, and they will, they'll listen to you and they'll provide you some advice. And don't assume for one moment that they'll just be on the manager's side. They won't be, because from their perspective, they would rather take down a manager than a lowly level worker, right? Because to them, in the investigation world, the bigger the fish to fry, the more exciting it is for them. I know that's probably a silly way of putting it, but that's what I'm saying, is that if it's the higher up the level goes, the more interested they're going to be in taking that matter on and seeing what can be done about it. So just don't assume that they'll just fob you off. That they won't do that. They're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Can I add, I absolutely know in private sector of groups of nurses who have acted collectively, or there have been many complaints, and to mitigate the risk to the brand, they will terminate and walk that manager off. Now, the problem is they often replace them with a very similar personality type, but sometimes it is enough for exec members to go, all right, we need to address this, because it costs them a lot of money also. One thing I wanted to add, though, a lot of middle managers aren't supported. I want to get that out there. Sometimes they're not provided the appropriate education. They don't know the financial risk themselves. They don't go and educate themselves, and they are bullied from above. The problem is those middle managers, like your CNs and NUMs, need to realise they're indispensable. And selection criteria as it is, they'll just appoint someone else that meets their selection criteria that might not be what we expect. So again, middle managers, because again, we have a lot of middle managers on our group, and we often talk about this, and they are absolutely put into some terrible positions between supporting their staff versus their want to climb up the professional ladder. So they are in a terrible position sometimes too. Some take it on very vigorously and love that job of being that type of manager that most of us don't want,
And I've been a manager in private health as well as Queensland Health for since last century. We have seen over time the charge nurse or the NUMs, their role has been eroded. The core business of a hospital is basically nursing care, which is our front line and that middle management. And unfortunately, they have been stripped of their perceived power base, or sometimes we have actually given it away in certain circumstances. From the Nurses Professional Association into the 21st century, we're looking to disband that hierarchical structure. Everyone is a professional nurse with highly educated on that front line. They know their scope of practice, their responsibilities, and can self-manage. We don't need anybody else to manage. We're not toddlers still, as is perceived by certain hierarchy that don't have the knowledge base nor the qualifications to be working in the healthcare industry as you people do. So to be well aware that you have that power base, and to take that and empower yourself and your colleagues to be aware of that in the environment. Always remember that nobody has power over you unless you give it to them, and to be well aware of that. And that comes in the dynamics within the workplace, and also within the home, which is another issue which we're looking at, domestic violence, which probably does sometimes feed into the workplace. So from our perspective, we are pushing to devolve the current system because it's not working. As we can see, every health district, maybe one or two, are basically in chaos. And it is, I think, our responsibility in providing healthcare and patient advocacy to change how the work is done. I was fortunate to be socialised into the workplace as a manager, as a servitude manager and a servitude leader. So basically, we're all on the same line. You just have your pay reflects what your responsibility is and accountability. And in fact, we were always taught that the cleaner, which unfortunately we don't have a lot of in hospitals these days, I'm not sure why that was decided, is basically the most important person. So everybody has that responsibility, and our responsibility as leaders is to resource that front line. And that seems to have been forgotten in the chaotic situation, because everyone is out there for self-preservation. It's like going to work on the Serengeti some days for people. Yeah, so we have to sort of take stock and change the dynamic within the workplace. So we have, I think, so many fantastic practitioners that we can actually look to change that system and do it on a shoestring budget.
Well,
no blowouts of budget.
A lot of these behaviours are linked to budgets. There is no doubt about it, particularly in private sector. Management KPIs are around money. So when nurses start asking for meal breaks, they start asking for overtime, they start asking if they can, if they advise, for example, they don't want to do overtime, all of these sorts of things, have to be discussed. And now I have lost my train of thought because I saw a question up there. My apologies.
On that note, we might actually start getting through that. I think we've gotten through most of the.
And I'm happy to stay because I'm aware we only allocated an hour. I'm not sure of your time for everyone else, but I'm happy to stay if everybody else would like to.
I'll need to run off at 12:30, but if we're still going, then just knock on the door, Gabby or whoever, and we
perhaps putting it out there, we could have another one and answer the questions we haven't answered. I would like this to be an ongoing type of discussion forum so that we get the message out there and we get more nurses and midwives and students and carers to.
Yes, perhaps the next one is how to change the system. What you can do.
Yeah.
Chris, there was a question that came up there, someone about shirt fronted, but I'm not sure what shirt.
We'll get to. I'm just going to go through.
Okay, great.
Okay, sorry.
And I'll sort of pick up ones as we get through them.
Thank you.
What if it is from nursing staff to a manager? I think we've already sort of covered that.
There's some linked ones here that I don't think, in relation to will bullying go on records when they're terminated for the employer at will, but again, there's no register. Some of the other things about
that's sort of a big problem if someone's in the public service. I mean, you do have to disclose that when you reapply for a public service job, but yeah.
There was another one about AHPRA deregistering, and I guess, again, you would know more about that, Terry. I imagine if it was proven, that might happen.
Yeah, they can, like it, but again, like it's going to have to be, if it's some repeated behaviour. And again, like I said before, like what other behaviours are going with it? So, I had a matter at AHPRA that involved bullying, and it also involved sexual harassment. And so that person was deregistered. So, it depends what the situation is, but it answer like bluntly, like not going to happen on the first go.
Yeah.
But could happen if it keeps going and there's other circumstances around it that are real serious.
It's still worth complaining to AHPRA.
Absolutely.
Because it will keep the person, because you get notified when it happens, even if they elect not to investigate. I agree with Terry. It's pretty rare. In fact, I think I've only really dealt with 2 suspensions of registration, only really 1 indefinite suspension of registration, and it was for something quite much more serious than bullying. AHPRA generally prefers that people just undergo re-education and going under supervision, which can be difficult if you're, if you've been sacked from your job in the midst of that, and your only option is agency work or something like that, where often you're the only RN on the shift. That's sort of the main hurdle for a lot of people who get restrictions placed on them by AHPRA. But as Terry said, it does sort of draw to other patterns of behaviour, and ultimately AHPRA is mainly issued concerned in terms of, I believe, under the Nursing Code of Conduct, not under bullying, but in terms of mandatory reporting events, which can include bullying. It talks about where there is a serious or significant risk to the patient or the public.
Yeah, that's all under Principle 2 that I was referring to. So again,
and also I think it refers to where it places the profession into disrepute. So I think there was a comment earlier here from I'm trying to find the name, Stella, where this was discussed. And I still recommend everyone, where possible, report to AHPRA. The worst they can do is knock it back. But what Stella described is, AHPRA said, it's just a single isolated event, we're not going to investigate it. AHPRA is confined to looking at incidents that either have a risk of adversely affecting the patient, or harming the patient or the public, or harming the reputation of nurses if this sort of incident got out to the public. So they are very limited in that, and they will get out of investigations in that manner sometimes. But it's still always worth reporting. So, and especially where it does meet that criteria, where it does look like it's potentially going to harm a patient, where it's potentially just a bickering about, a manager not giving you your entitlement, probably doesn't meet that criteria. But where it's directly impacting, and it's on the floor of the workplace, and it's you're in a high acuity environment or whatever, if that can somehow be connected to patient outcomes, then absolutely it's an issue for patient safety, and AHPRA should investigate it.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that too, Chris. So what AHPRA do, every notification that's received against a health practitioner is essentially a black mark against their name, whether it's proven or not. And now that's a whole new session in itself, but whether that's used appropriately or not. So, for example, if a nurse has had like 5 notifications against her over the last 2 years about bullying, and none of them have been proven to have occurred, right? When the 6th notification comes in, they'll consider those previous 5 and go, there's a pattern going on here. Now, one of the reasons why that is because in the investigation world, just because you can't prove something happened doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And what we call, and Chris will know this from his legal background, so it's like it's either the allegation cannot be substantiated, or unable to be substantiated, or is not substantiated. And the difference can be that there wasn't enough evidence to prove the allegation, or there was evidence that proved that it didn't happen. And how it's worded is around that. So just because you've got, for example, like 5 matters and they're unsubstantiated, they may be unsubstantiated.
Terry, I don't know if that's Terry or
the evidence could not be obtained, so he couldn't prove it. So that's something.
All right, Terry, we might just move over to ask just the next few questions, just because I think we're having some issues with the video lag with yourself. Can you hear us fine?
Yeah, I can. So you're saying before about something wasn't correct?
No.
Sound.
I was
dropping out.
nothing, anything that you said, Terry. It was just some technical difficulty. Can people let us know though if we do?
Oh no, I just thought. Yeah, that's all right. Just thought you might need some clarification on something. That's all right.
Absolutely. The next question I have here is, can you report old incidents of bullying? And the answer is yes and no. And it sort of relates back to what we were talking about earlier about making contemporaneous records of incidents. In the Fair Work system, there is no limitation period on stop bullying orders, but ultimately you're meant to have escalated the complaint internally. So, you know, and often they won't have jurisdiction if you no longer work there. So this is what we talk about, going to your union and looking for the most appropriate jurisdiction, because, you know, it could have been a potential discrimination or human rights issue, in which case your limitation period is 6 months or usually a year if it's a discrimination in the workplace issue. But most of the ones that relate to stop bullying orders are typically, you know, you still have to be an employee there to have legal standing, be it the QIRC or the Fair Work Commission. And to sort of combine it with another question here that I see that I think briefly mentioned, this concept of a constructive dismissal, which we didn't really go over. Constructive dismissal sort of refers to a dismissal where you have resigned, but you know you've exhausted all other options but for resigning. It is very important that you contact your union before considering something like that. We're not in the business of manufacturing claims, but what I sort of want to make clear is that it is a very tough legal threshold to prove constructive dismissal. Terry mentioned earlier that I have a legal background. I'm just an industrial advocate, but I work closely with our external solicitors. It's quite a tough threshold, and we do like to, when someone's considering that, because it's a very final option, to sort of go through the ins and outs of your case before you elect to do that, and make sure that you have exhausted all internal options in terms of doing that. Generally, I don't think I've ever seen a successful one in the public sector, just because there's so many different avenues that you can pursue. It's more of a common claim in the private sector where, you know, you might only have 2 lines of management and they're in cahoots with each other and they're not doing anything. That's generally when it's open. But certainly talk to your union before considering something like that.
Can I just, because I'm aware of time, can I just raise something, because it's come my way quite a few times in the last couple of weeks, of new employees or employees transitioning from one work area to another. And there seems to be because I think it's about workload, and it's all to do with lack of resources, and what COVID has done is exacerbated a lot. But one of the big things that seems to be questioned at the moment is, why should I as an RN have to teach and mentor? Why should I be doing this? And then they don't realise that that behaviour is coming across to those who are transitioning or who are new employees. And I just want everyone to be aware, it's in your code of conduct, as particularly as a registered nurse, you have an obligation. I'm really sorry if you don't like it, but it's under Principle 5. And you need to know that, because you could be accused of bullying because you've got the pit that you have to teach or mentor. If it's a resourcing issue, then you need to start to report your workloads. All right, because so yeah, a lot of nurses don't like to have to mentor. They don't believe it's appropriate. It is in the code of conduct. Sorry.
I agree 100% because you know, that's quite often what will be raised by people is that, well, you know, I breached the policy. I didn't do this because my manager didn't tell me.
Yeah.
You know, I've had that raised many, many times. And when you speak to the manager, I'm talking about nurses now,
Yeah.
NUMs, you know, they'll just go like, oh, well, they should know that. Well, hang on a minute. Maybe they should, but what's your responsibility as a manager is to make sure that they know, you know, so.
They're being called to meetings and next thing they're on probation and you're on probation and basically you can be under Fair Work Act and you can be terminated. They will find some legal way to frame it that they can terminate you while you're on probation. So often new grads absolutely struggle in that first year between their professional practice obligations and managing a new place of employment and literally a new career. I've also found, we're not talking about it today, but ageism, again, a lot of new grads seem to be the ones treated more inappropriately. And it's because there's this belief they must have been nursing for years and they must know stuff. I've had educators quoted as saying, well, you're a nurse, so you should know. I don't need to teach you much. Well, standards of practice are there for a reason. Scope of practice, as we used to call it, your areas of work. You know, I was a peri-op nurse. There's no bloody way I could go off and work in renal dialysis, for example, just because I'm a nurse. So again, nurses get pushed into areas they shouldn't work. Next thing, they've made an error, and then they're trying to backtrack and go, well, I wasn't appropriately facilitated or whatever. You've got to get on top of these things, I guess, as they arise and know how you're going to respond. And this is the time. The world is desperate for nurses. This isn't just Australia. The world is desperate. We've got all the British nurses want to come here. We've got Australian nurses want to go somewhere else. It's a global issue, really.
Yeah. I'm going to have to duck off in a moment.
Yeah.
So you might just, or yourself, Marg, or
I can't work that hard.
That's all right. I might expand the chat a bit further as well, so it's easier on the eyes here.
Look, I'm the same. I have to head off as well. But just before we go, I just wanted to respond to one of the questions.
You're welcome to respond to one of them, but if you have to go as well, what we might do is wrap up after you've responded to that last one, and we'll get back to some of these questions. We'll take a note of all these. We have recorded it all. And
I'm thrilled with the interaction. I'm looking at those scrolling down, and that like warms the cockles of my heart.
Yeah.
That there are so many, because I hope that every person that's come online today that gets something out of this goes and talks to someone else and contacts their union or association or myself. If you're being bullied, you join our NAMIBA group, which is full of support, education.
And how do people find? Is that
you
a
can
website?
Find it on Facebook. So you just put in nurses and midwives. I've given it to Marg in the bio. So it's a supportive group. We're nearly at 2,000 members. We give emotional support. I like to give the practical advice. Tammy has a lot of information about mental health. And then we have Michelle and Barbara so we all have our own strengths, I guess, and we try to appropriately respond both on the page, very careful about confidentiality and keeping the space safe. We don't allow naming of any organisation unless there is a specific purpose. Like today, we mentioned NPAQ because we don't want it to get online stouch about who represents who. We don't care. We have members from every group, every organisation.
Absolutely, and we might discuss that in the next one.
Yeah. So I would love to be able to come back and do this again and hopefully get through a lot more of the questions that you've already been provided as well.
So easy.
I'd like
Terry
to
wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry.
I think
Terry.
didn't he add one thing? Didn't you, Terry?
Yeah. Look, I would be really, really quick. So I just wanted to touch this. What are the consequences of bullying behaviour? That's one of the questions that was asked. My response to that, and you might have some others: turnover of staff, loss of productivity, toxic work culture, reputational damage to the organisation, difficulty in attracting new employees, financial penalties imposed by courts and tribunals, personal health issues to the person being affected. So they are the consequences, and there's probably a few others as well.
I'm not too big on stats, but I know that Tammy has a lot of stats, and apparently, and I certainly believe Tammy, the suicide rate of nurses and midwives now is much higher than the average community. Just like other frontline workers, we're hearing about the AMBOs and others. Healthcare workers have got, now that to me is appalling, that we are so caring and loving with others, and yet we treat each other in such a way that is leading to suicide. And I know I went to 3 workplaces, I think over a period of 4 weeks, and every site, the nurses came and told me that a nurse had committed suicide. Some directly left notes linking it to their employment. So we need to consider, we don't know what everybody's psychological, where they are, what's gone on in people's lives. Are they a victim of DV? Has tragedy hit them in other ways? Some people are more resilient than others. And when we are behaving in a particular way, we don't know that person's history. So to me, we need to be kind. We need to care. You can resolve conflict, you can raise concerns, but you have to do it in the right way. And it is also the same with the response. Nurses get all uppity, they get an accusation, and then they want to make a counter accusation, which actually doesn't necessarily do them any favors, you know, but they've been bottling it in for so long and dealing with issues that they take home. So yeah, it's really affecting everybody in our community.
And to sort of wrap it up on that note, I think a lot of these incidences of bullying sort of stem from the perpetrator not considering things from your perspective or another person's perspective, or getting in your shoes. So it's important that when we look at making complaints, that we get in their shoes and we think about, well, if I was receiving a complaint here, you know, what sort of information would I want so it doesn't seem totally frivolous and vexatious, and, you know, affords me the right process. And I think that's the important takeaway here. I mean, bullying has always been a tough issue to resolve in the workplace, because, as we mentioned, there's the balance of natural justice and also, you know, the need to be heard as a victim. But ultimately, you can be the better person in this dispute from the get-go when you make a complaint, just by considering things from their perspective. It might seem, you know, you might have grown to loathe the person, but I mean, that's the important thing in not just assisting the complaint process and ensuring things are run smoothly, but also potentially assisting you in terms of resolving the issue, in terms of thinking about, well, what sort of deep-seated issues are there here that potentially are outside of my control and have potentially, you know, made this person want to act in this way, and what sort of reasonable resolutions exist? Do I really want this person who's having a tough time and dishing it out on me to be sacked, or would I prefer that they, you know, go through performance management, or we just have a sit-down adult mediation and resolve the issue? So that's something to consider all the time, is really just look at it from the other person's shoes, because chances are they haven't done it from yours, and it's important to start off these on the right foot rather than be vindictive and try and be the bigger person.
And lastly on that, my thing, a very wise man said to me many years ago, and I use it a lot, is that the content must reflect the intent. And I think whether you are writing something or you are verbalizing something, you need to think about how it's coming across. And that old adage, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, is so true. Absolutely. If you say something with a smile and care, it is not going to be taken that you are trying to be offensive or rude or bullying.
Yeah.
So yeah, very wise man, I think.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our audience today for your time and also your participation.
I hope everybody got something out of it.
And also to take time to thank our panel for their expert knowledge, fantastic knowledge base that we have in this room today. And I think in the new year, we'll look to have a further panel and have a theme around how we can actually perhaps change
I
the situation.
I think we'll be back soon.
You know, I would love to come back again if you'll have me. And I would really appreciate it if there is a way that you can share that NAMIBA Facebook. Oh,
Certainly.
it's on the logo, isn't it?
Yes, we
On
can
the on
actually
your
have that put up
that would
onto
be
our
fabulous. That
social-
would be.
social
Yep.
media.
And we are looking for people who want to take some action. So just so you know, a few of us have already met with the Greens Party. We've written to the Labor Party. We've had some contact with other parties. We're going to lobby and talk to whoever we can to raise the profile and the plight, I guess, of nurses and midwives currently, what they're facing.
Fantastic.
So
All
thank
right.
you. Thank you for
Thanks,
the
everyone.
Thank you so
opportunity.
much. Thank
See
you.
ya.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Fantastic.